We all know that Donald Trump did not work alone in his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Many of those who aided in Trump's efforts have either been named as his co-defendants or identified as co-conspirators. But there are some names that we have not seen, names that you might have expected to be prominent in all of this, like Roger Stone, Mike Flynn, and Steve Bannon. They're all part of the story, but don't seem to appear in the indictments. And then there's Lin Wood, the prominent right-wing attorney, election denier, and pro-Trump fanatic who was all over the place defending Trump in the months following the 2020 election. Wood even told CNBC that shortly after the 2020 election, he hosted a who's who of conspiracy theorists at his plantation in South Carolina. Yes, I did say plantation, including Kraken lady Sidney Powell, Mike Flynn, Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne, and Cyber Ninja's CEO Doug Logan to coordinate their efforts. And while Wood was never formally part of Trump's campaign legal team, he did file a series of meritless lawsuits on Trump's behalf and had his name attached to at least one legal case in Michigan alongside one of Trump's actual lawyers, the aforementioned Sidney Powell. That case resulted in a federal judge sanctioning them for what he called their historic and profound abuse of the judicial process, calling the lawsuit, quote, frivolous. Well, now we may have discovered why we haven't heard Lin Wood's name in the indictments. In a filing today from Fulton County District Attorney Bonnie Willis regarding conflicts of interest among some of the defense lawyers for the 19 defendants in her RICO case, she revealed that Wood is now a witness for the state. Wood tells the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that while he has been told he will be subpoenaed by the prosecution, he has not flipped on Trump and claims he wouldn't have any knowledge with which to flip on him anyway. Joining me now is Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee and a former member of the House Judiciary January 6th Select Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. Well, I'm sure your ears perked up as mine did when we heard that Lin Wood would be a witness for the prosecution. I just want to ask you what you make of it, because he's been sort of kind of a shadow figure, but that hasn't been a central figure that we've heard of in this case.
Well, you know, one day there will be a legal ethics or professional responsibility course designed just around the lawyers who were involved in the Trump insurrection in an attempt to overthrow the presidential election, because there were so many rules of professional responsibility that were violated in addition to the underlying law itself. It does not surprise me that some of them may be turning state's evidence and trying to speak as if they were mere legal advisors and were not participants, which is probably, the best life preserver they're going to try to grab onto here.
I'm going to put up on the screen some of the people, and there are 21 people who the grand jury recommended indicting in Georgia in this RICO case. Among them, Senator Lindsey Graham, Mike Flynn, Kelly Loeffler, the former senator, Boris Epshteyn, one of Trump's lawyers and advisors, David Perdue, also a former senator, Cleta Mitchell, the right-wing lawyer we know was part of hatching all these plots, and there's Lin Wood. Lin Wood is in that list, too. And I wonder, as a part of the January 6th committee, did you all ever consider subpoenaing, Lin Wood? Was he someone that you all thought about bringing into the narrative of the January 6th conspiracy, given that he hosted, what he called a who's who of these conspiracists and election deniers at his plantation?
I don't remember specifically whether Lin Wood was someone within, the scope of the investigation at this point. And I'm actually, I continue to be amazed at how many new substantial players have been discovered who I'd never even heard of before. And we spent, more than a year on this, obviously.
And there is that aspect of it, as you said. And then these indictments, each one is sort of pulling new threads, to your point, of people we hadn't been introduced to, characters we hadn't, including these fake electors, who some of them now have been indicted as part of the conspiracy, particularly in the RICO case in Georgia. What do you make of, just as a constitutional expert, I love getting nerdy with you and talking constitutional stuff, the idea that some of these people are now trying to make the same claim that Jeffrey Clark, the former DOJ official, made, that Mark Meadows, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, made without success, to say that our cases should be federal, that you can't do a state RICO indictment against us because we are somehow federal. What do you make of that argument?
Well, in order to make that very difficult proof, you've got to show that you were a federal officer working on fulfilling a federal mission, essentially doing your federal job at the time. And that's not at all what presidential electors are. Presidential electors are appointed by the state legislature through the election laws and through the election process, which incidentally is something that the Republican Party has been emphatically insisting upon with the so-called independent state legislature doctrine, which was basically rejected by the Supreme Court in a recent decision. But they, above all, have been insisting that these people are state actors and not federal actors. Just because you're a state actor who has a federal function of casting an elector doesn't make you a federal employee or a federal officer. That's ridiculous. It's not like presidential electors have an office in Washington or a department or even meet other than when they meet in the state capitol to cast their votes. And at that point, the governor certifies the Electoral College and sends it to Washington. These people really were fake electors. They had not been certified by the official Georgia state election process. So they were, even if they were real electors, they wouldn't be federal, but they were fake electors. And so they were fake state officials impersonating state officials in a way to try to strip the public of our right to elect our own president through the process we've got.
It does feel in some ways like one of the things that these MAGA Republicans do is they take advantage, we were talking about this in the previous segment a little bit, of people sort of not really understanding how the system works, to say things like, well, the vice president can decide who the president is, right? The vice president can make that call in the well of the Senate, which is not true. Or that electors you can have different ones from the ones who were chosen. Do you feel like in some sense it is a civics problem, that Americans really, because the system seems so vague to so many people, the Republicans are just introducing these kind of lies into the system that are very difficult to extract?
Well, you've got it. I mean, it's definitely a civics problem if we're going to maintain a completely archaic and antiquated and obsolete system like the Electoral College. It is the system, and so we have to be faithful to it in implementing it. Some of the right-wing supporters of the insurrection are saying, oh, it's all a problem with the Electoral College. No, we've got to enforce the Electoral College as long as it's the law. But it would be good if we adopted the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact Agreement, which has been adopted by 15 states now in the District of Columbia. Of course, the Republicans are opposing that, and that is a method to try to get us to a national popular vote. I mean, it just makes no sense that in the 21st century, we're not electing the president the way we elect governors, senators, mayors, council people, and everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. Yeah. And that's easy to understand, and it doesn't have all these nooks and crannies that can be exploited by a strategic bad faith actor like Donald Trump and in an attempt to foment chaos in the system.
But Congressman, Republicans can't win the presidency with the popular vote. So, they're never going to go with that. At least in the modern era, they've not done so in 6 out of 7 times. I do have to ask you this, with apologies, because you're such a dignified individual. But I do have to ask you about this because she was, I would say, the star witness in the January 6th hearings. Cassidy Hutchinson does have a book out. She's made a lot of allegations. We know that there was a lot of intimidation that she faced. We know that she had to be pretty brave to go against Donald Trump's lawyers and what they were telling her to do to lie. She's now also made an allegation that one of Trump's co-defendants in the Georgia RICO case attempted to sexually molest her, made advances toward her, lewd advances, and that would be one Rudy Giuliani. And I want to see if you have any comment about her allegations that essentially back, I guess, in the ellipse area, she was back there with Rudy Giuliani, and he attempted to get quite handsy with her.
I mean, does that surprise anyone? And does anyone doubt that story for one moment? She was about the most believable, credible witness I've ever seen in my life. And Rudy Giuliani is obviously full of it and completely undependable and unfaithful as a witness. Look, if America had believed the women who came forward about Donald Trump's sexual harassment, and if we had followed what we heard with our own ears in the Access Hollywood tape, we never would have gotten into this situation. Usually sexual assault and tolerance for misogyny and sexual harassment go hand in hand with authoritarianism. And it does not surprise me for a moment that on that most sinister of all days, January 6th, Rudy Giuliani decided that that was the moment that he was going to grope Cassidy Hutchinson. I just want to say to Cassidy and to Molly Michael and all the other young women in the Republican Party who serve faithfully and are testifying honestly now about what has taken place. There's a party for you. It's called the Democratic Party, and come on over. It's a big tent. We've got room for you. It's the party of democracy and freedom and equality in America, and that's how we're going to make meaning out of all of these savage experiences that people have had.
And respect for the autonomy of women. This is me staring in E. Jean Carroll. So, Congressman Jamie Raskin, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you very much. And now this quick programming note. Next Monday night, Rachel Maddow sits down with the aforementioned former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson for her first live interview since serving as if not the key witness in the January 6th hearings.